Hi, good morning, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us today for our webinar, Reimagining Innovation, Preparing for Recovery Through Digital Empowerment. We're really excited to be delivering this webinar today. We've got a fantastic audience with over 270 people registering the event from a really diverse range of organisations. So I'd like to thank you all very much for taking valuable time today to join us. We have a great lineup for you today, not least starting with our discussion facilitator, Dr. Jim Hamill. Jim is the CEO of Leading Digital, and I'll hand over to Jim shortly to take the rest of the session. We have got some really great panellists who will be leading the discussion. We've got Angela Dixon, the Service Manager at NHS Lanarkshire, James Pickles, the Managing Director UK at TP Group, Joe Paccitti, the Managing Director of the Centre for Engineering, Education and Development, otherwise known as SEED, up here in Scotland, and Alan Summerfield, Head of Innovation and Technology at Fenner Precision Polymers UK. Unfortunately, our planned fifth panellist, Nigel Root from Glasgow City Council, had to pull out last week, but we'll hopefully be able to get Nigel back for a follow-up webinar over the next few months. Also taking part today are myself, so I'm Dave Kerr, the CTO at Smart Crowds, and last but not least, Graham Crombie, our seasoned innovation practitioner who has hundreds of successful innovation projects over 20 years under his belt. So both Graham and I will be monitoring and responding to questions and putting them to the panel where we can as the session progresses. So just over to some housekeeping before we start. The format today is a facilitated panel discussion. So only the panel and the facilitator will have audio and video switched on. There is a side Q&A and chat facility within the Zoom webinar tool in which anyone can submit a question either to the Smart Crowds team or to the panellists. So if there's anything you want to ask, just send it in and we'll do our best to respond. Anything we can't respond to during the event, we'll make sure to follow up directly with you. Also, if there's a point you'd like to make about something or just to start some chat around it, again, send it in and we'll do our best to get it published for everyone to see. The webinar will be recorded and made available to everyone, to all the registrants and participants, and we'll also be following up with a post-event survey. So we'd really appreciate if you could take a couple of minutes to complete that when you receive it. Talking of surveys, so you'll be aware that we also issued a pre-event survey to help us focus the discussion on some of the innovation challenges that are of most interest to the audience today. So first of all, thank you very much to everyone who took the time to complete this. We received over 80 responses, which is fantastic. The purpose of the survey for us was to try and tease out what might be the key barriers to innovation and change amongst the organisations who are registering for this event. So the questions were specifically related to challenges around digital empowerment. Each question was posed with a strongly disagree to strongly agree 1 to 10 response scale. And question 1 put forward that perhaps a lack of ownership of change and innovation initiatives was a key challenge. Question 2 was around lack of visibility and transparency on the progress of ideas being an issue. Question 3 was putting forward that perhaps a perceived tendency for organisations to select management ideas most of the time was a problem. Question 4 on the subject that organisations suffer from idea selection paralysis, which leads to little or no progress ever being made. And question 5, putting forward that a lack of genuine breakthrough ideas coming from employees causes innovation programmes to peter out. So we've analysed the results based on the strength of agreement, focusing on those that showed moderate to strong agreement, which was a score of 7 and above. And the results, as you can see, indicate that question 1 and question 2 look to resonate mostly as the key barriers from the 80 responses that we received. So question 1, just to recap on what that was. So that was that organisations struggle to drive transformation efforts across the entire workforce due to the lack of ownership of change and innovation initiatives amongst key leaders and influencers at departmental, functional and regional levels. And then question 2, I suggested that poor visibility of the progress of ideas in organisations leads the wider workforce to feel disenfranchised and cynical about leadership's stated desires for involvement and empowerment. So the focus of the discussion today is going to be mostly around these two questions. We may venture into the others as the discussion goes on. What I'm going to do is just hand you over to Jim now to take you through the remainder of the event. I'll be back at the end of the event with some closing remarks. So Jim, over to you.
Right, thank you, Dave, and thanks to the Smart Crowd team for inviting me today and for organising this event, especially to Stuart for all his hard work in pulling this together. Big welcome to the panellists and a big welcome to everyone who's attending the session today. Just to reiterate Dave's point there is a Q&A facility, so we very much welcome questions and comments from the floor, trying to make this as interactive as we possibly can. Before just passing over to the panel, I've been invited to say just a few words about where we are on the road to recovery, and I'm tempted to answer that by asking, where is the road? It's a very difficult question to address. One thing for sure, and a term that I dislike enormously, is the term the new normal. I'm not quite sure what that actually means, but whatever it means, we're some distance away from entering a new normal period. I think the only normality that I can see is going to be a prolonged period of turbulent change and uncertainty. Now, on a more positive note, for everyone attending this session today on innovation and transformation, on a more positive note, the pandemic has, in my view, helped to unfreeze a lot of the constraints, routines, habits, and existing ways of doing things that we're used to. In many cases, it's been a wrecking ball to the way we do things around here. The implication of that for me is that for organisations, need to think about seizing the moment here. COVID-19 to me has provided a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for driving change, for driving innovation and driving transformation. And I think a key focus of the session today is, are we as organisations ready to seize that moment? It's provided us with a fantastic opportunity for building the modern, intelligent, innovative workplaces that are going to be essential in a post-COVID-19 and indeed post-Brexit volatile world. We're excising legacy technology, legacy management thinking that has stifled innovation and change for years. The organisations who will emerge strongest from the pandemic are those, in my view, that leverage the full potential of digital supported innovation, for reimagining how they do things in three main areas. First of all, reimagining how they engage externally with customers. Secondly, reimagining how they operate internally, streamlining processes, automating as far as possible processes, becoming more innovative, intelligent. And thirdly, a lot of us will be at the moment questioning our underlying business model. I think one of the exciting opportunities, and just leading into the panel here, one of the exciting opportunities for innovation is that hopefully the pandemic has led to a situation where the question, why innovate, has been won or why transform has been won. And the key question now is the how of innovation, or the how of transformation. And how do we accelerate that journey to becoming the modern, intelligent, innovative workplaces essential in a post-COVID world? And I'm sure the panel will have a lot of interesting comments on that. Just one final comment. What has become also clear recently is that there's a real danger of our people, our staff, our employees suffering from change fatigue. And there's a couple of really interesting reports that have been published on that, in the sense that people frightened about job security, frightened about health, their own health, their family's health, and frightened about the future. And that to me means that any change, transformation, innovation must operate jointly with our teams. And I think from a Smart Crowds point of view, that's exactly what Smart Crowds is intended to do, namely a crowdsourced approach to innovation and transformation. So I think that's enough from my point of view. My job today is basically just to facilitate the panelists. And I'd like to start off just by asking each of the panel members to very briefly introduce themselves, where you're from, and just say a few words about where your organisation is on its innovation journey, what impact COVID has had, and what your hopes are for the future. Now, I'll maybe just list this according to the way you're showing up on my screen. So in order, it'll be James, Alan, Angela, and Joe. So James, would you like to lead off? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel today. So yeah, James Pickles. I'm a UK Managing Director for TP Group PLC. TP Group PLC is a very interesting business. It's very fast moving. It's an eclectic mix of skill set and provides plenty of opportunity, which makes us all very, very busy. And I think a point today is actually how we can control it, particularly from an innovation change perspective. So the business is actually a development of a decade ago from a spin out with Brunel University regards downhole gas compressors. So it has innovation, or the desire to innovate and change in its blood, I suppose. So what that means for us today in terms of where we are, it's a 400 plus employee business. The UK has just over 300 of that of the TP Group population, and we're spaced around various areas of the UK. Path capability as life support systems into submariner applications, ruggedized electronics, consulting, and also precision fabrication into oil and gas, which has never kind of had the need more to think about innovation and think about change, because to Jim's point, the new normal, what does it actually mean? It means that it's unknown. It means that we're going to have to listen to the market. We're going to have to really have a good horizon view of what's coming our way so that we can adapt and make sure that we're ready for whatever challenges, I suppose, that they bring. So in terms of our innovation cycle, where are we? There's some very interesting points I'll touch on later on in terms of how our heritage, our 50 years of skill within oxygen generation, and carbon capture actually does allow ourselves to think about, could we step into the hydrogen economy? How do we actually take that technology and capability into something new for the greater good, and also for kind of long prosperity for TP Group? So I look forward to probably speaking a little bit more about that, but that's TP Group and myself.
Okay, James, thank you, and we'll definitely come back and pick up on those comments. Thanks very much, Alan.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Alan Summerfield. I'm Head of Innovation and Technology at Fenner Precision Polymers UK. We are in the rubber industry. We manufacture a diverse range of rubber goods, ranging from the bendy part of a bendy bus through the heated pad that's in the seat of your car that you're probably starting to enjoy at this time of year, through to automotive hoses in large JCB and Caterpillar vehicles, and then all the way down to the tiny little rubber rollers that move the cash out of the cash machine in the wall. So diverse range of projects. In terms of where we are in our innovation journey, it's really a tale of two cities, because about 2 years ago, we were purchased by Michelin, who are in a very different place on their innovation journey. We're a 30 million, 350 employee company, and they're a multi-billion, multi-thousand employee company. So two things are happening in terms of the locale in the UK. We're moving from a cost-controlled culture to a growth-driven culture, which Michelin are driving. And then we're integrating with the Michelin innovation networks, which is interesting, and they're very well established, and there's some great programs. But it is interesting watching an organization of that size try and migrate towards their target. And one of those targets is to have 50% of their revenue by 2050 to be outside the tire industry, basically because there's more money to be made outside the tire industry. So that's a summary of where we are. I look forward to getting stuck into some questions. Thanks.
Hi, Alan. Thank you for that. And again, I'm absolutely convinced that we will come back on that. So thanks. Angela, a big welcome to you. And before I bring you in, a big thank you to everyone in the NHS for all your absolutely fantastic efforts since March and before. So thank you, Angela.
No problem, Jim, and thank you all as well for that. That's really nice. I'm sure my colleagues will be really pleased to hear that. Thanks for inviting me along today. So my name is Angela Dixon, and I am a service manager within NHS Lanarkshire. I cover a range of different specialties throughout my post, and working as a senior manager, work in collaboration with secondary and primary care colleagues. So I might come at things from a little different background, because it is public sector rather than private sector. You know, despite the negatives in relation to this virus that we're all dealing with, and the complexities that provides for all of us, whatever business background we come from, the processes and the reaction within NHS have been outstanding. It's really changed the mindset of a lot of people, and we are really challenging that. That's how we've always done it type culture that we tend to find within the NHS, and I'm sure the rest of you will feel that in some of the areas that you work as well. But we've seen a lot of really dynamic, innovative solutions coming into play. NHS is under huge pressures. You know, it was pre-COVID, it is during COVID, and it will continue to be post-COVID in terms of finance, resource, and a range of other factors that can impact on our services. However, we feel that there's been a lot of innovation. We have moved to a very agile leadership model, and hopefully as we move through some of the questions for the rest of the webinar today, I will be able to provide some deeper insight into some of that. So thank you.
Hey Angela, thanks for that. And I think you've raised a very interesting challenge there that no doubt we'll return to as we go through the session today, that the pandemic has in many industries created a momentum for change, but at the same time has it created some change fatigue, and how do we actually balance the two of them? Joe.
So, come off mute there, I'm getting a goodbye. Good morning, my name is Joe Paccitti, and again I'd like to thank the panel for turning up and going to make this exciting, and all the audience, and particularly to the guys at Bridgell. So yeah, my name is Joe Paccitti. I'm Managing Director of SEED, which is a membership body for engineering, technology and manufacturing companies. So the challenge, I guess, that we face is that is a sector which is facing innovation and challenge rapidly. I mean, not least of which is the digitalisation of that sector. So as a membership body and my small team, we effectively facilitate and curate activity. So we need to be ahead of the curve. We need to be working with our members so that we can actually anticipate what's new and meet those challenges. And we've been around for 14 years, very successful, but have delivered on a face-to-face model. People love coming to seed events because there's a great opportunity, that family network. We effectively call ourselves a hangout club and a community of practice. So when I talk about COVID-19, it basically meant I've had to go from 100% face-to-face to 120% digital. Since lockdown, we've delivered around 80 events and nearly 3,000 people. So our reach has gone up considerably, and the challenge for us is to make sure that we're still relevant and making sure that we're not duplicating opportunity, because I think people value that when they give up their valuable time, that it's something that's different. So I guess that continues to be the challenge for us. Our innovation journey really moved to digital, but we won't actually go back. So Jim's question about new normal or whatever, I kind of agree with it. It's a difficult phrase, but we certainly won't go back to 100% face-to-face. So we've already accepted and made those changes for the better. So I'm looking forward to further engagement, hoping I can share some light along with the other panellists along the journey.
Okay, Joe, thank you. There's a few questions starting to come through on the chat forum, which is great. What I'd like to do is move on to the first key question I want to address to the panellists, and once we've done that, we'll pick up on any of the comments that have appeared on the chat forum. So just for the benefit of the panellists, there's two key questions here that we're going to try and address just to provide a framework. But obviously, if there are additional points you want to bring in, or the audience wants to bring in, then absolutely fine. For question one, we'll start, if you don't mind, with Angela and Alan, and then James and Joe coming in as appropriate. And then for the second question, we'll reorder that just from a time management point of view. I think just to kickstart the discussion here and going back to Dave's short presentation of the survey results, especially the results in terms of the lack of ownership of innovation and the poor visibility of ideas, perhaps leading to some disenfranchisement and indeed some cynicism amongst the workforce. And that result is kind of supported by other research in this area. And given everything that's happened in the last 6 months or so, the question I've got for the panelists is it time to reimagine our approach to innovation? Is it time to reimagine our approach for a volatile, uncertain and digital world? In particular, is it time to shift to a more employee-driven approach, an open source, crowdsourced approach? And a couple of comments already on the chat forum have kind of agreed with the line that the why of innovation has been won. The only question now is the how. So Angela, can I invite you just to kick off and pick up on those comments? Is it time to rethink and reimagine how we approach innovation?
It absolutely is time. I think it was time before COVID, but you know, I am a big champion of reimagining innovation, being very dynamic in terms of change. So I'm a improvement leader for Scotland as well, and I think that we often have to consider improvement in everything that we do, and we have to consider that all the time, you know, not just when we're faced with certain things that impact on us, such as a worldwide pandemic, or working in health services. Technology is ever changing right now, and I think that gives us a real opportunity to engage with people. I am very much a believer in the people on the ground that are doing the doing. Are the people that understand the services, the stakeholders across many different services are actually the people that know things about processes or a service that sometimes us as managers or leaders perhaps don't know. And if you don't know, you can't fix it. Therefore, going out and engaging with people is really, really important, because you will find out information that you don't know of, and it will give you a whole different perspective. I think in terms of looking at digital solutions, as we move forward now and for the foreseeable future, with people working at home, the distancing measures and everything that's in place at this moment in time due to the pandemic, I really feel that's pushing us into using digital innovation as we move forward in terms of coming up with solutions for our businesses. And absolutely, I think we should grab the opportunity to introduce as many digital work streams as we possibly can to ensure that we continue to engage with as wide and diverse a range of stakeholders as we possibly can.
Okay, Angela, excellent. Okay, so it's a combination of digital and employee involvement, employee engagement. Thank you for that. Alan, would you like to come in now? Just before you come in here, Alan, there is a question on the chat forum that I can see here, which is addressed to you, so you might want to build this into your answer if you can. What are some of the challenges of innovation in a large corporation versus a small or startup type company? And can I just apologise to people who are asking questions like this? I'm not actually seeing what your name is, so I can't address you individually. Alan.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, so a lot of this question is driven by the current situation as we describe it. And I think, from where I'm sat in a manufacturing environment, there was two things it really did. One was it suddenly accelerated a requirement for decentralization of the workforce, because everybody suddenly ran for the hills and was working from home, which forced us into a digital world rapidly. The second thing, which moves against innovation, which obviously is, the order book falls off a cliff and there's a short-term dash for cash. So the long-term horizon tends to become less important, but we stick to our growth plans. Now, in terms of the question, is it time to shift to an employee-driven approach? I think actually it was time to shift quite a long time ago. I think, the current situation brings up these questions. And interestingly, my last role, where I was at 10 years, was actually in an employee-owned organization, another manufacturer. It was a process-averse, employee-owned organization, very innovation-focused. And the key thing I believe you need to get innovation going is engagement. And there are some really scary research around. They say that US businesses spend 100 billion annually on trying to engage their employees and end up with only 15 or 20% of their employees engaged. Without those employees engaged, you're not going to get the innovation going. There's plenty of other research that shows that innovation activities are really great ways to get people engaged, but only if they feel as if they're involved and they can see their ideas moving through the process and getting the attention it deserves. So absolutely, the digital environment that people have suddenly been thrown into will help them work in that way, and providing them tools, innovation tools to help them participate is vital. Now, I think one of the problems with the sort of either the top-down approach or the bottom-up approach, the top-down approach led by management, where the management says, right, this is the problem we're trying to solve, give us ideas. Employees down in the other remote parts of the organization may look at the problem and think, I haven't got a clue about that. So that tends not to work very well. But if the organization is just making clear strategic aims in very general terms and opening the door very widely so that almost any idea is relevant, and allowing people to really put ideas in a much more free and less ordered method, then you're much more likely to discover innovative solutions. Now, so I believe absolutely engagement is key to get everyone feeling as if they're doing something worthwhile. And in terms of, you know, probably the most open source and crowdsourced approach that I know of is the platform run by OpenIDEO. They do some sort of global challenges where they set sponsored goals by various organizations. There's been a couple on the circular economy, and that is a great environment because it's all public. You know, if you want to protect your idea, you have to protect it before you put it up on the internet. Everybody can see what everyone else is doing, and there's hundreds and hundreds of people around the world all participating, and that is probably the area where I see the most innovation activity in an open sourced environment. So in terms of the organization, the more we can get the employees engaged, the better, and the better tools we give them to provide ideas, the better. In terms of the question that was aimed at me, you know, large versus small, in a small startup company, a few guys in the same room knocking ideas around, it's great. But then you move to something like Michelin, okay, they may have the funds to run some pretty interesting schemes, but the large numbers of people a long way from the central strategic aims, and they need those tools to be able to participate. One of the interesting things that large organizations also experience, you know, it's a bit like the oil tanker trying to change direction. You know, Michelin have set these targets away from the tire industry, and you can tell by talking to their technical guys and other employees that they're finding culturally that's quite a hard shift to make, and it will take some time. So being a big organization with lots of money doesn't mean it's all easy, because it certainly isn't. It has lots of other challenges around inertia, and equally being a small company with a few guys or girls in a room with a new idea and a bit of money sounds great, but access to tools through lack of investment is equally a barrier. So I hope that answers that question on the chat. Thanks.
Okay, Alan, thank you. You raised one very interesting, well, several interesting issues there, but one that I'm absolutely certain we will return to when we get to the second key question. You mentioned the time for becoming more digital and the time for greater employee involvement and greater employee engagement. That time was even before the pandemic, and I would totally agree with you. The question I've got, and we'll answer this when we look at question 2. The question I've got is, why did it take a global pandemic to change people's attitudes? So we'll leave that for now. There are a couple of interesting questions coming in the chat forum, but I'll have a wee focus on that in a moment. I'd like to bring just the other 2 panelists in here quickly. Joe, do you want to come in, and then James?
Yep, sure. I suppose maybe a little bit of a schizophrenic answer, because I am deeply involved in a best practice peer-to-peer network of sharing. That answers a little bit about the open innovation question, that companies are coming together to really exchange ideas. The question might be, someone touched on it earlier, the difference between continuous improvement and real innovation. But you know, let's be honest, if you can get some continuous improvement, that can be innovation or a lead to real step change. So you know, I'm privileged, I think, that I do actually see that. I also do see, and that's the schizophrenic part, is that when people go back to the ranch, having spent time with other colleagues from other organizations openly sharing, there's still an inertia to take up some of those ideas and drive them forward. And the best I can take out of it is the ones that do well, it comes down to good leadership. I can almost pick the leaders in my membership group that are great. The way I would describe it is, if I had to work for that company, would I work for that person? And the short answer is, if I say yes, they tend to be the ones that I feel are innovative and are challenging. So I think the leadership need to enable it. But having spent time with smart crowds and Bridgeall, I'm pretty certain that there's a digital solution to make it better. So, you know, I think perhaps the time is right now for platforms to kind of get the good practice working better, and those that can't, remove that hurdle. So my schizophrenic answer is I do see some good things happening, and that open innovation is working.
Okay, Joe, thank you. And again, you've raised an issue that's very close to my heart, and I was going to mention it in relation to Angela and Alan's comment. Is it time to reimagine leadership, not just reimagine innovation? And I'm sure we'll pick up on that as the session progresses. James.
Yeah, hugely interesting point, and I suppose my approach is very much kind of sits in the court from what Joe's just said. From a leadership perspective, my role is very simple. From my own perspective, is to drive engagement and then in turn, drive productivity as a business. So we talk about reimagining our approach to innovation, employee-driven approach. Yes, and yes, from my perspective. Decentralization and engagement from Alan's point of view as well rings true. That we've really got to take a step back and look at how we kind of assess what do we mean by innovation through the organization, and where we start talking about continuous improvement, innovation of thought, and actually seeing how we do things today is just as important as kind of what we're going to provide to the market, or what the market is telling us they want. That real kind of enterprise holistic view, and the innovation becomes part of our everyday language. It comes from leadership, it comes from communication, and the need to, I suppose, the changes that have just occurred have absolutely forced us to start thinking about how do we keep that communication process moving forward, and digital platforms, communities of interest that aren't a physical community are absolutely key for us to remain successful moving forward. So I think, yeah, from my perspective, it's really about engagement within this process. And I think not just to everyone's kind of term the pivot, using the pivot word, but from a product perspective, actually how we see the business opportunity is there in what we currently do today. It doesn't have to just be change, and we need to be careful around change. And from my perspective, I like to talk about improvement as opposed to just change for change's sake. So I think that a part of the why has been confirmed by what has happened over the last 8 months, but I don't think it's fully confirmed the why in an organisation. What we're trying to do, and then we start to look at the how in terms of kind of bringing it to life, which is what we'll talk about a little bit more. So
yeah, it's interesting, James. When I make the comment that the why of innovation has been won, I usually put a question mark behind it. The why has been won in a lot of organisations, but I think there's a lot of organisations where it hasn't been won. Thanks very much for that, James, and the four panellists. There's a number of very interesting comments on the chat forum here. Graham, do you want to come in here and try and summarise some of these comments?
Hi, Jim. You caught me on the hop there. I was trying to answer a question as you literally brought me.
Multitasking.
Yeah. Literally, a question I'm answering at the moment, or having a go at answering, is around how do we innovate in an education environment where technology, I think by many, would be seen as a poor proxy for face-to-face. And I think the very bland answer, in some ways, to my mind, is around the same way you innovate anywhere, as you frame the challenge. You look for stimulus, and you actually generate ideas, and you experiment. You try things. I think all of that has to happen in any environment for innovation. A couple of questions about culture. I was interested in, about delegation and empowerment. I think there's discussions around innovation, almost all, and especially employee-driven innovation or wider spread innovation, inevitably comes up or runs up against questions around how we define roles, what we expect from people, how we encourage people to look beyond just the immediate day-to-day job and perhaps be more future focused. Probably more, Jim, but I don't want to get Tim too much in the way of your panelist discussion.
Yeah, okay, Graham, thank you. I think there was a specific question there about supply chains that might if anybody wants to pick it up, there's been disruption to well-established supply chains, and we are likely to see more players disappearing. What can companies do to innovate in a situation where the normal supply chain is changing? Are more manufacturing companies turning to digital platforms to sell capacity? Do any of the panelists want to come in on that?
One of the things we've been seeing is, as various parts of the world come to a grinding halt, our customers who may have previously taken our business to other parts of the world are coming back, desperately seeking urgent supplies because they've lost their original source. In terms of digital platforms to support that, I haven't seen any that are really playing on the global stage, but it certainly is the case that the number of businesses and suppliers are going to be changing pretty rapidly. And I think there's going to be, as things get back to whatever this new world is going to be like, there's going to be some switching back again after the short-term changes in supply chain. But I haven't come across any digital tools that I've seen that are really helping us facilitate that sensibly.
Okay, I
was just going to just to add to Alan's point there. I think for me it goes back to what we kind of previously talked about from a leadership perspective, and actually how we consider the future of our organisation. So working on the business is always something that I'm trying to push and other people talk around, as opposed to just being so internally focused, and actually understanding what is happening out in the market to then mitigate against that. And the approach to innovation is very much the same, to be able to have that environment internally to consider what's happening, to then bring that information back into the organisation to make the right decisions is absolutely critical. And that's something that we should have all learned from, I suppose, over the last 8 months, is that, who saw this coming? Not a great deal, but the actual process of risk mitigation and thinking about a new future and opportunity. When you look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, it's a really important process to make sure that we're considering in the business. And it's been there for a long time. And we look at the textbook and go, when am I going to use that again? Well, it's here, for me. And I think really considering the external market is absolutely key for everybody.
Okay, James, thank you. Very good comment.
Regarding the tools, some of my ex-colleagues and partners in the Economic Development Agency are suggesting that why have your own website, an e-commerce platform, when you can use Alibaba and Amazon B2B? And that seems to be a little bit of thinking that's going on, so that will disrupt not just the kind of B2C model, but the B2B model. So I'm sure that might be quite difficult for a Michelin type company or Fenner, but seems to be some of the chat that's being pushed out at the moment. So maybe watch that space, and there's quite a lot of events going on, so talk about that.
So just bear with me here, I'm just looking at the chat there. Okay, thanks Joe for that. Yeah, I think I'd like to move on to the second question now. So thanks very much for your contributions there. Before I do that, I'm just going back to Graham's summary of the chat forum there. There's quite a number of really good, interesting comments, which I think we could actually cover when we move to question 2. So if I can just bring these out. There was one comment about innovation teams, and I think the point has been made: do innovation teams create an innovation silo, where innovation is seen as something that part of the organisation does? And how do we kind of combine that with Angela's comment about getting everyone involved? The issue of culture, as Graham said, has came up in a few of the comments, and how do we create that culture of innovation? And there was a comment there about perhaps the reluctance of staff to become too closely involved in change and innovation, because the net result of that would be an additional workload on already overpressed staff. So I think those are very interesting questions, which I think we might want to pick up on. If we could move to the second key question that I want to address to the panel, and we'll start in reverse order here. So we'll take James and Joe, with Angela and Alan coming in as necessary. You know, the questions on some of the comments on the chat forum have kind of raised the issue of what are the barriers and obstacles to implementing more of an employee-led approach to innovation, and how can those barriers be overcome? You know, and going back to your point, Alan, you know, the need for change was there before the pandemic. So why did it take a pandemic for us to move forward here? So what are the main barriers and obstacles that we need to overcome? Because if the argument why innovate has been won, and the only question now is the how. So how do we move forward in this area, and how do we balance two kind of conflicting pressures here? First of all, the need for greater employee engagement, which I think we would all agree with, but also the need for governance. And I think it was you again, Alan, that mentioned the top-down, bottom-up approach. So I think most of us would agree that we need a combination of both approaches here. If it's too bottom-up, it maybe leads to a proliferation of uncoordinated initiatives, so there has to be a level of governance there. But if the governance is too tight, then it inhibits, by definition, it inhibits innovation. So that's just a nice, easy question for you to answer. And I think we'll start with James on that one, because I think you've actually raised this already, James.
Really easy question. So I think
question.
So interestingly enough, I mean, the burn for digital platforms, I work with a superb organisation, Be the Business, and I encourage anybody to Google them and just see how they're looking at supportive businesses. But tech adoption is here. You know, tech adoption is recognised and they focus a lot on the SME environment, which is a huge part of the UK economy. So we understand it. I think, yeah, the points raised, the questions, can innovation teams generate silos? You know, do we just create wallpaper that are improvement lists? Do we really understand if we're going to work on something? Is it going to make a difference? For me, it very much goes back to how we are set up. You know, what is it that we're actually talking about? Do we understand, I suppose, the why, the purpose? So and it comes down to leadership, and that doesn't mean that ideas are top down. That means that the environment that's created is a holistic enterprise environment, and that can be a very complex thing, and we can overcomplicate it very quickly. So for me, being part of a large organisation in the past, part of the inertia was the over complexity within innovation, whether that and also kind of continued improvement process. So in terms of barriers, which then can lead to the level of governance that you have, for me, it again going back to the fact that the need for change was there. The understanding of barriers has always been there for me. You know, understanding the environment, for one, old habits, behaviours, perception of innovation being another, the mindset that we have within organisations around innovation, and then also our attitude towards it. How do we change that? That's necessary to kind of enable innovation. So just kind of going through those briefly. You know, from an environment perspective, you know, how do we enable a positive view for innovation? How do we have a positive conversation around it based on the fact that we see the need? And we see the need from the market, but we also see the need from the voice of the business, because we have a platform that kind of enables that to happen. You know, systems and processes to enable the conversations, to generate ideas. We used to do stand-ups, you know, stand-ups around a board to think about what the business is telling us, those kind of things. You know, bringing that to life still is possible, and that will be through tech adoption. Old habits and behaviours and the perception of innovation, it's expensive, you know, it doesn't really change anything. Our focus on today, you know, cash and profit is the thing that keeps us going. You know, how do we actually bring it part of maybe everyday life, that within the work environment, that kind of keeps that momentum moving forward, so we don't build back the inertia that we had in the past. And those feedback loops and recognition of ideas and actually taking things forward are kind of the things that are really going to break those old habits and behaviours. And the mindset, the need for innovation, you know, for me, it's communication on anything. So how do we ensure that we set people's minds in a way that this is a burning need? The pandemic's kind of reaffirmed that it was always there. You know, so how can we take the business forward? What is the view? And again, it goes back to, is it a key strategic objective? It comes back to the leadership and that says that this is important. And the last one, just to kind of finish on attitudes towards learning, and in this case for innovation, I go back to my automotive days, you know, the old plan, do, check, act cycle. Do we actually enable that to happen? Do we embrace, do we have a trusting environment that says no idea is a bad idea? And it's extremely important that we have these elements within our structure that are going to kind of bring this to life. So again, for me, it goes back to, from a leadership perspective, strategically, is it important enough for us to endorse this and sponsor it and take it forward? And then to think about how it comes to life. Because if we're effective at that step, the governance, because of the trust and the processes that we have in place, don't become a burden. And then you look at innovation teams, we can understand what is the purpose of that team. Is it something that changes often to bring new heads in? Are they a facilitator for people having a voice throughout the business? So it's really kind of making sure that when we do something, it has a purpose and objective that leads into the overall business need. And then the systems will come to life, because we've got to make sure the business's behaviours and discipline are there before any system kind of is made effective. So for me, in terms of barriers to innovation and ensuring the governance is on point, all of that kind of, for me, has to be considered and has to be part of the business structure and strategic view.
Excellent, James. Thanks very much. You've raised a whole series of issues there relating to organisation, culture, people, leadership, and so on. And I think that's where the debate needs to focus. Now, thanks for that, Joe.
I agree with everything that James has said. So how do I add to that? Well, I think I would maybe think of a metaphor, and I'll come to that, but it's about confidence. It's taking all of those elements and trusting that you can actually do them with that good leadership. I really actually hate KPIs, I think, because they're backward looking. So the metaphor I use is, you know, my family are Italian, so Italians don't drive with a rear view mirror. They chuck that away and they look out forward and they go for it. And quite frankly, too many businesses spend their time looking at accounts, looking at things that have happened in the past, and trying to use those measures to anticipate the future. So I think if you can kind of get that mind shift and then think about that future element, then everything that you do can actually be empowering to allow you to go forward. So, you know, that's often what I say. It's certainly one of my phrases that I've stood up before and said either to my team or to other people. And then I think if I'm looking for some simple things, some simple takeaways, so really dropping down to the detail, if you spot some opportunities, you agree you're going to do them, for God's sake, do them. Don't sit on another 6 months not making them happen, because that is one of the biggest barriers to disenfranchisement across your staff and other peers. So, you know, get on and do those quick wins, make them happen, shout about them, do the PR internally, because if you don't, you switch people off. And I think that's one of the common phrases I've heard is, you know, we had some great ideas, you know, we worked on this, nothing's happened. And actually there's nothing that's more of a kind of don't do this anymore. So I agree with everything that James said on that strategic level. Chuck away your rear view mirror. That's definitely my metaphor. Go forward, and actually when you see some things that you can do them. timeously.
Okay, Joe, thanks for that. Can I just come back to you on that, Joe? I mean, based on what you've just said there, James said, indeed Angela and Alan earlier, we recognise there's a cultural issue here, but listening to the conversation, is the cultural issue more to do with the leadership of organisations rather than with the employees?
I think it's the culture of the leadership. So I'll use one example. One of my members moved from American corporation to Swedish. So they still have to look at the numbers. But when the Americans used to batter them every month on where are you with your numbers, where are you, the Swedes go, how are the numbers looking, what's going on, how can we help? So I think, to be honest, that whole leadership, that cultural thing from wherever it is, it's that vision of wanting to help. I think that makes a difference. It's quite difficult sometimes when people give you an enabling structure as well, because you're then expected to go forward, and that can be quite scary. So, you know, so I do think that word I used of confidence and having a confident leader, a confident organisation, and confident people really is the enabler. You know, and throw away the blame cannon. I mean, that's the other thing that doesn't really work very well. I don't know if that gives you the answer, Jim, but I think it's those things.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Joe, a confident leader is also a leader that accepts that, especially in the current environment, that they don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
You know, we've always put our leadership on a bit of a pedestal in the sense that they are the people that know best. But leadership now, I think, needs to be more humble and recognise that, you know, not one single person has the answers to everything. Okay, thanks for that, Joe. Angela, would you like to come in? Because I think the comments around this question and the comments on the chat forum there are obviously very, very pertinent to the NHS.
Absolutely. So pleased to hear you say that, Joe, in terms of KPIs. So it actually took me a bit of a while within my current post in the NHS as a manager to be brave enough to actually stand up and say, I'm not really going to let the targets get in my way here. What I'm here to do is bring this back to the services that we deliver and doing the right thing. You know, we talk very much about getting patients into the right place at the right time, but as long as you can meet the targets that are set by the Scottish Government, and as much as I feel that that's really, really important for the quality of care and the governance structures that we have within the NHS, I think sometimes you focus far too much on trying to meet those targets instead of the journey that takes you from where we are to how we actually meet those targets. So we are quite lucky in the NHS that, you know, some of our management team are quite dynamic, innovative. You know, that's exactly what I love. That's the place I love to be and the kind of team that I love to work with. However, we've had the historical barriers that have been there. You know, we come under so much public scrutiny that sometimes that is a real barrier for us. Obviously, funding can be a huge barrier for us as well. But I took it really right back to the basics, and I think that, you know, it really is about leadership. So we employ people. So my title is service manager. There's nothing about leadership actually within that title, and often, you know, people see you as a manager and it's a them and us culture. So I feel that I've broken down quite a lot of those barriers over the years that I've been working in NHS Lanarkshire, and I would say that has given me the biggest gain actually, is breaking down some of those barriers and those cultures where it's managers versus everyone else. And I think a lot of it really comes back to, and James, you touched on this as well, it is actually basic communication. So communicating with your team, telling them what the targets are, what are your expectations as a manager, what is it we're looking to achieve, what are the expectations of the employees, what is the expectation of our patients, and how do we bring that all into something that is actually really quite realistic, you know, and providing feedback and recognition to those teams, I think, is really, really important. So we often hear people say, oh, we've tried it all before, we've been here, we're always looking at these things, it never changes anything. And I really, really think that going back and being very honest with your team about what it is that you're looking to do is one of the key things that we can do to help move people forward in their innovation journeys. Empowering your staff and giving them the voice, but also, to bring it back to my comment about it being realistic, sometimes the answer is no, and we have to just be strong enough to go back and say, well, the answer is no, we're not going to do that, and here's why we're not going to do that. You know, so there's a balance really to be met between managing things, you know, in terms of the expectations, the targets, the finances, and bringing all the business side into place as however esteemed leaders would expect us to, but also in terms of how you take your team on a journey and how you lead them to get you to the right place. You know, I'm very fortunate that I have really high achieving teams that I work with, but it has taken me a number of years to get us to that stage and build on that culture, because previously, you know, and historically there has been years and years worth of no innovation, no moving forward, and no feedback. So I think that we are very fast moving into a different culture. Certainly I can only speak from my area of the NHS, but I hope that is replicated across all NHS organisations, because it can only be a good thing.
Okay, Angela, thank you. Some excellent comments there. So thank you very much for that. Alan.
Yes, I was one of the questions on the chat was relating the word silos, and how do we make sure that the wider organisation doesn't look at innovation as the innovations team's job. And I think, you know, I was hired here to develop a culture of innovation. And when I arrived, there wasn't really even a culture of doing projects, let alone innovating within projects. You know, we've got, you know, half a dozen design engineers who are basically the innovation team because they design stuff. So let's say, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll get a great digital platform in place, and suddenly we'll have hundreds of ideas coming in from all over the organization. So that solves that problem. But I think there's two things there that you need to do. You need to change the view of the innovation team away from the fact that they're doing the innovation to the role of the innovation team being the one that is responsible for getting the engagement and administering whatever platform you put in place, because there's nothing worse as being the guy on the shop floor who puts in an idea and then not hearing anything. And the activity level, you know, you look at some of the research, you know, thousands of ideas where you used to have 10. To respond to each one of those requires resource. So I would see the shift in role of the innovation team going away from doing the doing, they still have to do some of that, to taking responsibility for the communication, as James was saying, and getting the engagement and making sure there's the follow through and the feedback from the employees. Without that, you haven't got a chance. And at the top with the leadership, it's all about inspiring and motivating and getting the people's heads in the right place and keeping the door open so that people feel it's worthwhile. So the silo thing, it's not the job of the innovation team just to do the innovation and do the drawings and make the prototypes and all the rest of it. Part of that role is to make sure that the organisation is engaged.
Okay, Alan, thank you again. A lot of really good comments there, and thank you to the 4 panellists. I'd like to see if Graham, are you available to come in just now in terms of comments on the chat forum, because I'm seeing quite a lot of contributions here.
Yeah, available but exhausted, Jim, trying to keep up with the, the questions and the comments, and I've realising I've probably run the risk of sounding like a stuck record in a lot of my responses, but it does require a kind of, or it does facilitate a summary point, and that is around, I think, to me, and it might just be me, but I think there's scope for lots of organisations to think differently about how they define jobs and expectations from people. And to me, it's that, how do we get people to be more innovative? Well, I think, frankly, leaders need to make that an expectation from the outset. We need, that is a part of the job. The job is not just about the results today. The job is also about results into the future. But I don't think we do enough to clarify that that is an expectation. So set the expectation, and then all the challenges of empowerment that come after that. So that was certainly, I think that summarises a few of the bits of conversation that I think I would have had.
Okay. Yeah, I've been trying to monitor the chat as well. A lot of really interesting comments coming in there. Graham, I'm conscious of the time here, so what I'm going to do here is, just based on what Graham said there, I'm going to try and very quickly summarise some of the key comments that have been made on the chat forum, and then I'll push it back to the 4 panellists just for some final summing up comments before I bring Dave in to wind up the session. I can understand Graham's comment about fatigue there, because there are a lot of really good comments coming in here. How do we build that confidence amongst leaders, confidence in leading in a period of turbulent change? There was a comment there, Joe, which I think you'll like. Your organisation has to be comfortable being schizophrenic, and I think I know where that comment's coming from. I think it pays to be a bit schizophrenic in a turbulent, uncertain world. There was quite a number of comments there that seemed to be on the same kind of theme, and maybe the panelists would like to pick up on this. The comments were really about the shift from kind of face-to-face to digital platforms, and whether the fact that we're working remotely now, whether the fact that we're actually dependent on digital platforms rather than face-to-face communications. What are the issues and challenges there? Does the move to digital make it easier to collaborate? Does it make it more difficult? And that comment was also made in relation to the shift in the education sector to digital. What are the pitfalls to avoid in moving to digital? So conscious of the time, can I just invite the panelists to make the final comments here, and if you can, just try and build some of those feedback from the chat forum into your comment. And I'll just go in reverse order here in what I'm looking at the screen. So Alan, it's you first, I think.
So yeah, just thinking back, so we closed our factory for 3 weeks back in April, so everybody was suddenly dumped into their home environments. I think I noticed 2 things. One, all meetings were shorter because they were without the banter and the good humor, if you like, the intros and the outros. So in general, the meetings were more efficient. However, the technology, I mean, we're using a pretty good platform here, but that technology needs to get to a point where legitimately you can have people talking at once and still hear them all. That kind of spontaneity isn't achievable on these platforms. Until you get that, I don't think it's going to be as effective. Brainstorming, knocking ideas around a room. When we got back into the office and got our measures in place and were able to put half a dozen people in the room and knock ideas around it, people were like, oh, it's so glad to be back. So at present, the digital platforms aren't there yet. People have come a long way with learning how to mute and unmute and raise hands and all this great stuff. But in terms of spontaneous, quick moving idea generation, brainstorming, I think we've got a way to go on the platforms.
Yeah, I think I would probably agree to an extent with that, Alan. But to me, the move to digital requires a completely different mindset here. And because of my background in higher education, the way I explain this is that, you know, a 3-hour lecture is still a 3-hour lecture, whether it's delivered face to face or online. And I think the challenge that a lot of higher education institutes are facing at the moment is that transition to online delivery of lectures. And I can't help but thinking we're looking at this the wrong way, that digital provides us with an opportunity to reinvent the way we do things. So, you know, a platform like, for example, SmartCrowds doesn't require real-time interaction the way that we're doing it today. You know, it allows interaction 24/7. You know, and I think we just need to rethink the way we kind of approach things. So thanks for that, Alan. Joe?
Well, I think if we only go digital, we'll have Trump as the next president of America again, because it's effectively Twitter. I think maybe Angela needs to go and get a psychologist from the NHS to answer the question, or an anthropologist, and it really builds on Alan. Human beings need human beings. There's a bit about the bit where we need to come together to get that next bit of the digital idea over the line and doing things. It's a virtual arm around someone isn't enough. And I think we're always going to have to struggle to kind of deal with that. But I think it can actually help us get to that quicker. So if we've got a mix of digital and face-to-face, we're in a good place. But right now we don't have the face-to-face. The only face-to-face I do is my golf buddies. I'm a partner, I'm a dad. That's it, that's my world. And you know, that's not enough for me with the team. I think we need to kind of move forward. So some good things, but I do think we need the human bit. We need to somehow have that that bit that makes human beings human beings.
Okay, Joe, thank you. Angela?
Yeah, so I'm just going to come in really and agree with Alan and Joe's comments. I do think there's a balance to be struck there in terms of digital and face-to-face. You know, we have really worked very hard in terms of putting in digital solutions for both staff and for patients. We've moved to remote consultations with patients in terms of allowing for telephone consultations and video consultations with patients. Now, I feel from a patient perspective, this has been really well received. They have embraced these changes, and actually our DNA, so our do not attend rate, has reduced because people are being communicated with in a different way, and perhaps they find it a little bit more efficient, more, you know, it doesn't take up as much of their time travelling to and from a hospital. They can perhaps nip out of the office and have a conversation on the phone with a consultant. Therefore, they do find it a little bit efficient. However, I do feel that there are some areas where that physical contact, physical examinations and things that have to take place in clinical practice are really still quite important, and that will never go away. So it will not be suitable for all cohorts of patients. I would say that that's more in relation to meetings where we find that. However, in terms of innovation, in terms of engagement and empowering our staff, absolutely, SmartCrowds provides that digital pathway for us to engage with people. You know, as you touched on there, that's available 24/7. So I work in an organisation that works 24/7. However, as the manager, I'm not here 24/7. So there may be someone working on a ward who is on night shift, who has a really, really great idea, but actually never has the opportunity to come and speak to me. A digital solution will allow that to happen. So I do think it really is about the balance.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Angela. It makes perfect sense. So it's that hybrid between digital and face to face. Sorry, James.
Yeah. So I agree with everybody. but I think just coming at it from I suppose a leadership perspective, so the UK organisation for me are over up to 8 sites and multiple teams in different sectors, different disciplines, and I think it's the adaptation that we need to do is it's multi-layered, it's different approaches to ensure that, I suppose, we try to bring as much, I suppose, less superficial interaction into the workplace. And Teams, Microsoft Teams, all these environments are really good. The smart crowds piece around communities of interest is something that I think is very, very important. That it's not just about how we're going to make that new widget better or something around those points. It actually starts to think about knowledge management and how we really start to unearth what the power in our workforce that we kind of have. I don't mean that from a duty perspective. Absolutely, I don't know everything for my business, and I don't want to. My people will do, and that's really what we're going to try and aim to do. The point in which you've gone through the last 8 months, at the start it was new, it was, I suppose, to a level it was interesting, and for engineering businesses and people, you can't work from home, you just watch TV in your business. Actually it can become very effective. Now over time, my concern in terms of the point I suppose I'm trying to make from a leadership perspective is that I don't want work to be a 24/7 thing for my people. They need to be able to disconnect, and they need to be able to enjoy life as much as possible that isn't work related. Now, communities of interest can bring in actually interests from almost a hobby perspective, but we've got to make sure that the way we see interaction within our teams absolutely considers the well-being of the people, which means we've got to try and make the time in which they spend engaging as effective as possible. So I think it's multi-tool. It needs leadership, it needs accountability and ownership to maintain a level of control, but it needs to listen to the people in the business to make sure that it's effective. So I think the community element of it is really quite a nice step forward.
Okay, James, thanks for that again. Very conscious of the time here, so can I just, before I invite Dave in for final comments, can I just like to thank all 4 panellists, Alan, Joe, Angela and James, for your fantastic contribution this morning. So thank you. You've made my job very easy with your comments. Dave, do you want to come in, concluding comments? And thanks from me to everyone who attended this morning.
Yeah, thanks Jim, and thanks to yourself as well for leading the discussion today so effectively, and also just I'd like to thank again each of the panellists for sharing their experiences and insights on how embedding innovation and change throughout the organisation by means of business unit and employee empowerment comes with a range of challenges that need to be overcome. So some notes I've taken, just have been scribbling as the panellists have been sharing their experiences. So James spoke about how having a positive conversation about innovation is key. How do we break old habits and behaviours and the attitude? What's the attitude to change it? How can we break the perception that innovation is expensive? And I think building momentum and showing early quick wins and meaningful outcomes is key. And on the subject of governance, as James also pointed out, an effective plan, do, check, act process sitting at the centre of any innovation programme can be a real enabler for ensuring good governance. As something Angela said, improvement is required all the time. It's not just for high impact situations like we're facing right now. I think asking questions of the people at the coalface is always going to bring up things that surprise you. But even if you don't know it, you can't fix it. So you must find ways of getting out there and bringing others into that conversation. Alan made the point that decentralisation of the workforce was a shift that should really have happened some time ago, and we completely agree with that. It all starts with engagement, and innovation is a key way of building that engagement, but only if people see the ideas moving forward. And another key point I took from Alan is how do we make sure that innovation is not seen as the innovation team's job? And this is something that happens in lots of organisations. It isn't just a case of buying a tool and asking employees to go and start submitting hundreds of ideas. It does require that shift from the innovation team to be the team that actually is now responsible for getting engagement and innovation capability moving across the organisation. And just finishing up with what Joe said, so building innovation confidence is key. And I think building that around measures that model the future that you want to see, rather than the KPIs that measure past performance, chucking away that rear view mirror, as Joe put it so well, and something that was reiterated by Angela as well, that the journey to improvement and a future vision is often just as important as meeting the immediate targets. I think finally, again, another thing that Joe mentioned, taking ownership of actions and actually making projects happen, getting quick wins and sharing them, that's a key way of building momentum. So, it seems clear from the discussion today that tackling these issues by democratising responsibility for innovation and change initiatives to the people who ultimately know the business best, and that is the employees at the coalface, can pay real dividends, not just from a financial return point of view, but also from an employee responsibility and inclusion viewpoint, which is an aspect that's never really been more important than at times like this, with all the uncertainty and volatility that's around us, when employees really want to know that they are making a difference. So I've certainly found it a really thought-provoking session today, and it's clear from the activity and debate on the questions and chat forum that it's obviously a topic that is definitely relevant and timely. So just to finish, I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us today. At Smart Crowds, everything we do is about helping organisations find and turn more ideas into more meaningful outcomes more of the time. And we've worked really hard to deliver a easy to use, flexible, powerful cloud platform that enables organisations to turn leadership upside down, democratising innovation and change through workforce empowerment, but crucially, always within a governance framework that provides a clear line of sight back to the goals and the strategic priorities of each business unit and the entire organisation, and providing that transparency over what the plans are, who's doing what to make the plans come to fruition, and actually tracking the progress of that work through to meaningful outcomes. So for anyone who's interested in finding out more about how Smart Crowds does this, we'd be delighted to carry on the conversation. We've left some contact details on the screen there, but in the meantime, just thank you again for joining us this morning, and I hope you all have a great day. So bye-bye for now. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, Dave, thank you. Thank you. And thanks everyone for attending.